to begin with a land acknowledgement. And as I think about the uncertainty of our current climate, I find myself looking at the land acknowledgement in a different light. I think about the land acknowledgement, of course, as a way to recognize and appreciate the land and peoples that we share this land with, that we're honored to work and play and live on together. But now I'm also thinking of the land acknowledgement as a way to ground myself in the uncertainty of our times. I think about the beauty of the land that surrounds us and the strength and the courage of the people of the Treaty 7 region in Southern Alberta. And I hope you too can take a moment in the upcoming weeks to ground yourself in the serenity of the Treaty 7 lands and its people. So the panel discussion today format will be, we have 3 speakers with us and 3 questions. Each speaker will have 3 to 4 minutes to speak on each question before we move on to the second and third question. At the end of the questions, there will be opportunities for everyone to ask questions. However, please feel free to use the chat or unmute your microphone if you have any questions in the meantime. I apologize for the barking dog. Okay, so we're going to start with discussion question 1. And the order of the speakers will be Lily, Mark, and then Mohammed. And I'd like to ask each of you, how have you successfully used engagement strategies in large online classes?
Thank you, Lorelai. I love your land acknowledgement. Anyway, so I have a few ideas. The first classes, I normally do some activities to build the sense of community. I have them complete a Google form where I ask several questions such as like hobbies and some of the questions about the basic choice need theory, which kind of shows the aspects that motivates them to learn. Sometimes employability skills if I have a business class, and these personalities to see, you know, how they communicate. So with that information, it kind of gives me an idea of what kind of learners I have in the class, even though they're large classes. I use channels like Slack to communicate, so you can use also Discord as another channel, and just to build a good professional connection with the students and to be able to build that sense of community where everybody is helping each other. We also have students posting their bios, or like it depends on which class it is. Like if it's a business class, which is a smaller class, but they will have posting their bios. But if it's a math class, which is very large, I normally don't do that. And just to get to know each other. The other thing is I implement interactive activities using online tools such as like Padlet, Menti, Jamboard, Kahoot, shareable documents, and so forth. I provide options to the students in different projects sometimes where they can demonstrate their learning in different ways, not just the traditional ways. I use a variety of teaching strategies to deliver the content as well, like as in activating prior knowledge and also like acquiring new knowledge and applying new knowledge. I use a lot of scaffolding according to how the students are responding to the material. I ask, like sometimes if I ask a question, I say, please type the answer, but do not press enter. And then I say, okay, now everybody press enter. So then that way I can see kind of like the waterfall of all the answers and people are not just like copying the answers of each other. I use the tablet to help the students, like especially the visual learners, especially for those math courses. I provide like questions to think about, to like kind of say to be ready for class, because there are students that they need more time to think about the answers, and then once we get to class, then they are able to participate, especially for the students that they're a little bit more quiet. Sometimes I do group Kahoots where I put them in breakout rooms and they have to solve a problem together. So that's the only way that they can make it happen. And then when they get back, we all play the game Kahoot just to see, you know, and it's a lot of fun. It doesn't really matter like the points, they just want to win, but it doesn't really matter who, but it's just the fun activity of working together. When we have breakout rooms, I send them reminders to give a different role to the students, and just remember to like set up, appoint a leader and the leader does this. So I always kind of give the protocol at the beginning, so then everybody knows, and then we kind of rotate everybody. And then I teach them the Socratic method of asking questions. So then that way we get into more critical thinking. And so, like, if someone answers a question, so then the other person has to say, okay, why this and how this. And so then that way they kind of like actually start thinking about giving a rationale why they're providing a particular answer. And for a complex graph or materials, I upload the presentation into Prezi, and then I'm able to zoom in into different aspects of that, and so then it is more accessible to all learners. So there you go. So those are some of there are 14 strategies that I just shared.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you so much. Mark?
Sure. Well, that's amazing, Lily, and I learned already a whole ton, so thank you so much. When I was coming up with trying to prepare for this question, I had a whole list of things that I do to try to engage students in online classes, and I realized it was more than I could talk about in 4 minutes, and so I decided to sort of rank order it. And what I realized was, when we talk about engagement, there's a bunch of different types of engagement in the first place. You can talk about, there's textbook, textbooks will often have things like, how many students have read this chapter by this date or something like that. You can quantify that sort of engagement. The type of engagement that I'm more interested in, though, is the type of engagement where a student is listening in class, they're excited to learn, they have that feeling of not, oh God, I can't wait for class to be over. It's, I'm sad the class is over and I can't wait for the next one. And so how do you get to that kind of engagement? And so that to me is the most important, because the rest I think falls out from that. And so some of the things that I do to try to foster that type of engagement. The first is, I'm a big believer, there's some sort of controversial-ish research out there that says students can only listen to a lecture droning on and pay good attention to it for about 10 to 20 minutes before they start to tune out. It's controversial on the exact amount of time, but we can all agree that you can't just talk forever. But the research generally shows that if you break up that lecture, if you break it up into little activities or videos or a joke or something, that refreshes, you get another 20 minutes out of them, and then another 20 minutes and another 20 minutes. So the things that I generally do, I'm pretty conscientious about making sure that I'm including some sort of activity or something within that every 20 minutes or thereabouts. I mean, I'm not like dictatorial exactly every 20 minutes, but fitting it in. And so what are some of those things that you do? The first is including lots of demonstrations in class. For online classes, I've had to modify some of my demonstrations, normally where I might have a volunteer come up to the front. Instead, I'll have the entire class. I do a demonstration where I prove that you can't see color in your peripheral vision by holding different colored pens behind your back. You kind of mix them all up and you hold them out at arm's length apart, and you kind of gradually bring your arms forward until you stare forward. So you can gradually see, okay, at what point can I actually tell there's a red one on this side and a green one on that side, And I encourage students to do the same thing as I'm doing this. Grab 2 colored pens, something simple that people can do at home, but it gets them literally out of their seat and gets them doing something in the class. That's a really huge thing. There's lots of online demonstrations as well for like perceptual phenomena that I use in class and things like that. But for no matter what your subject area is, there's got to be some sort of a demonstration that you can use to help students connect what you're teaching to their real life, because that's what really engages them, is that understanding of this isn't just some esoteric field of study. This has actual importance. I also do things like I include memes and stuff like that, something that's broadly applicable that usually everybody's seen before, like the dress, the white and gold dress versus the black and blue. Which one do you see? I include that in my classes as well. And I relate it to the material. We talk about color constancy and why is it that some people see one versus the other. And I can explain that, but by relating it again to something that they've seen, something out there in the real world, that makes students really excited, and they're excited to learn more. I also, this is not one that's for everybody, but I include jokes. Some people are a little uncomfortable including jokes. I include lots of jokes, and they don't have to be good jokes. I mean, that's the thing I really want to stress here. One of the first times I ever taught was at Western University. I taught intro psych there, and I was sort of heartbroken and delighted at the same time that one of my student evaluations at the end of the year was talking about dad jokes. I was like, what do you mean? These are great jokes. But at the same time, they were saying, I really love the dad jokes. A whole bunch of people had similar comments to that, And so when we talk about different types of therapy, for example, toward the end or in the middle of that unit, I might talk about, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? One, but the light bulb has to want to change. It's a terrible joke, but at the same time, they've just learned the material so they can kind of get it on a pretty good level. And at the same time, it just kind of breaks it up. And you wouldn't think you'd get a huge response out of a pretty terrible joke like that, but you do, because it's so unexpected and because other people don't do that in their classes. And so it's really, really important to kind of have that that joy, that fun, and bring that to the classroom, right? That makes a huge difference. I include lots of videos and things like that. That's not really different from some of the other things that I've talked about. But the biggest thing that I wanted to talk about was it's really important to get to know your learners. And I do actually some of the same things that Lily was talking about, but it's also really important to let your students get to know you. That's probably one of the biggest things you can do to try to promote engagements. And so how do you do that with a large online class? I mean, you can't have individual interactions with everybody. So what you do, or at least what I do, is I tell stories. And it works especially well if they're kind of cute or funny or embarrassing or a little bit self-deprecating stories, whatever your style happens to be. But telling stories about yourself makes you more relatable, makes you more human. Some instructors seem to think that you need to be like a walking, talking textbook, but I feel like if students get to know you and they see you as a real human being with sort of quirks and flaws and a goofy sense of humor, or whatever it is that makes you special, whatever it is that makes you unique, that's really important to building a sense of trust, a relationship. So the students trust you, they know you, they're like, I can relate to this person, and therefore I can learn from this person. This isn't a robot who's memorized everything and I'm never going to be like that. This is a person just like me that I can relate to, and that's a really big deal. So I'll end off giving an example of this, I guess. I should also note, when they tell these stories, I sprinkle them throughout the semester. They're not done all at the beginning or anything like that. They're sprinkled all throughout the semester, and they're not done randomly. They're usually related to something about the course content. So at one point in psychology, we talk about approach avoidance conflict. That's where you really want something, but you also don't want it at the same time. You're sort of enticed by it, but also scared of it at the same time. And so I give the example of the very first time I asked out the young lady who would later on become my wife. And, I talk about how I woke up for probably 2 weeks straight. I woke up saying, okay, today I'm going to ask her out. Today I'm going to have the courage. I was super shy. And so I would go out there, and every day I would think this, and as I would get a little closer to like seeing her, I met her at university, I would get a little closer to seeing her, I would get a little more scared, a little more scared, a little more scared, until I finally saw her, 20 feet away, at which point I basically had a heart attack and ran the other direction. And this happened every day for about 2 weeks straight, until I finally built up enough courage to actually, say, well, would you maybe kind of possibly think about the possibility of maybe thinking about maybe going out with me? At which point, she gave me this beautiful, dazzling smile and said, no, thank you. And so that's my story. Eventually, I did manage to wear her down, and she did go out with me. But telling a story like that, students laugh, they enjoy it, they get to know you a little bit. And believe it or not, that story has a lot to do with approach avoidance and that whole model. Actually, there's a lot more complexity to it, but it works really, really well. So having students get to know you is a really, really big part of student engagement. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate all the personal anecdotes as well. Mohammed?
Yes. So my response to the question is what Mark and Lily said. Basically, lots of great responses. Thank you both very much. I completely agree, and I have a lot of similar things that I would like to also share. So when you talk about online classes, there's the issue of whether they're synchronous or asynchronous, and a lot of times I have used a combination. So using the flipped or blended approach, we have allowed students to have access to instructional videos that they can go at their own pace, and then we bring them in synchronous classes, whether they be in person in previous years or in the past couple of years in larger synchronous classes. One big element in all of this was active learning. So for example, the topic that I teach is programming, computer programming. It's sort of mathematical and logical and all that stuff, and it's a skill you have to learn. So it's essentially I always draw a parallel between programming and learning how to swim. So it's not enough to just read about swimming or see other people swim. You gotta swim yourself. So active learning and getting them hands-on in solving problems is really, really important. So to start off, for example, every asynchronous lecture that we posted, we would have a few questions that they have to watch the lecture to be able to answer. And consistency I found was very important with this. So it wasn't that some videos had questions and some videos didn't, or we actually had a precise deadline for the quiz questions. So we typically would give them about a week to watch all of these and then answer these questions. The other part of active learning is essentially getting them to especially in synchronous classes or even asynchronous videos, getting them and encouraging them to program along with us. And this is sort of a style of teaching that I have dubbed as dev shop style of teaching. So dev shop, for those of you who aren't really familiar with software development, it's sort of a name given to a company that develops software or does that's where you actually develop software. So in a lot of the lectures, we actually get look at the problem, we break it down, and we start coding along with the students. So we're all coding as a large group, and we get to stop and share. So if you look at a subject like, let's say, philosophy or psychology, where you talk about an idea and then everybody kind of gets together and talk about that idea and then shares with the class, we sort of do the same thing with code. So we code a little bit of this and then people get to share, and students seem to really like that. Mark talked about story telling, and I think that's extremely powerful. So one story that I share with my students is how I gravitated to software engineering myself. When I started at the university, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I took a programming class, and I felt completely in love. I fell completely in love with it, and that's the story that I share with my students. And the reason I fell in love with it was because I wasn't really necessarily good with arts and crafts. I couldn't necessarily, create art, even though I wanted to. And when I got to actually program, it was like I was creating, and that was quite empowering to me. I was creating stuff. I was sitting on my computer and I was creating software that other people could use, and that was quite cool, especially for people who are engineering minded and really like building things. So I tried to share that story and then try to sort of show my students that they can use the skills that they learn in class and actually make something. And of course, engineers are very much career minded. So, getting other professionals to come and tell their stories, and them understanding, even with the skills they learn from a first year programming class, they can actually get a summer job with it. So try to relate their story, relate their skills that they're learning to real life applications. That engages them quite a bit. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that it's project-based learning. I think project-based learning allows people to be quite invested in what they have learned as they get to apply it to at least the real world problem. Now, when I teach programming, oftentimes I don't get them to pick any project that they want. A lot of times I define a project for them just so that I can really provide a lot of meaningful advice to all the groups, rather than, because there's not enough time when you have like 800 people in a class or whatever. But I find that project-based learning really helps people to engage. I add something to that. I love project-based learning, but I often do a hybrid approach. So the whole course is not project-based. Typically, the last 3 to 6 weeks of it is, and the first half is, mostly assignment-based, and they're learning, and then at the end we sort of bring it all together with projects, and they get to be super involved in that project, and they're quite invested.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, and thank you for the three of you. I mean, I'm already engaged. I already want to enroll in all 3 of your classes. So I love the strategies that you shared with us. Thank you so much. For the next question, we're going to pivot a little bit and really focus on how, it's a bit of a challenging question, but how do these engagement strategies that you so clearly outlined, how do they work in a synchronous and asynchronous environment? So how are you making sure that the students are engaged, whether they're learning face-to-face with you synchronously or perhaps asynchronously through D2L. And we're going to switch the order of the questions this time, and we're going to go Mark, Mohammed, and then Lily, please.
It's a fantastic question, actually, and it is a very difficult one. You're absolutely right. To me, one of the things that I started thinking about when I was thinking about this question was, what are the different types of interactions? What are the different types of engagement that you can have? I alluded to that earlier. One of the other types of engagement that I think is really important is having students think about the material, not just in class, but also outside of class. That's when you know you've really connected with someone. If they're actually starting to think about this, or better yet, share some of the material with their friends and family outside of class, then you know you've really made a strong connection with them. And so some of the things that I like to try to do, I'm pretty careful about some of the demonstrations that I select. I mentioned making sure you use materials that are available on their desktop or something that they can see on their screen. This is really important, and even giving them the links, if it is something like a video or a link to something else, that they can share it with their family, with their friends. I can't tell you how many people have told me, I do these demonstrations, like I mentioned, the color blindness in your peripheral vision. You literally can't see color in your peripheral vision. You should really try it. When you hold different colored pens in your arms, and I make people do this in the middle of class, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. In an asynchronous pre-recorded lecture, I literally just say, hit the pause button if you need to, go grab a couple of pens, but like, this is really important. Please, please, please do this. And people will generally do it. They'll give it a try, because it's so ridiculous to think I can't see color in my peripheral vision. They got to try it. And so what do? They get up, they try it, they realize they can't. For about 10 degrees in your peripheral vision, you can't see color, and they think this is amazing. And what do they do after that? After class, first thing they do, they go talk to their friends. Can you believe this is true? I learned this amazing thing today. You should try it. And they get other people to try it. And more people learn. And by telling other people about it, not only are they engaged, are they interacting with other people and telling you about that information, but they're also learning it better themselves, because we all know that you learn best by teaching others, right? And so that's really, really important. If you get them thinking about something outside of class and telling other people, you're getting them to learn really, really, really well. So that's a fantastic thing. A second thing that I often do, I tell students, I try to include things like little memes and videos in class, again, that they can watch themselves, share with other people, and talk about after class. But I also encourage them to send me stuff. If you find something that you think is relevant, don't just spam me, but if you think it's relevant, or you think it's funny, you think it's cute, you think maybe I might even want to use it in a future year in a lecture, great, go ahead and send it to me. And they will, or they'll post it on discussion boards. Send it to me individually if they're a little bit shy. And if they're a little bit shy and I think it's pretty good, I'll post it on the class discussion board in D2L. And so the other students in the class get to see, hey, other people are putting stuff up, and then they become more encouraged to do it themselves. It's not like their emails or their memes or their jokes are falling into a void. They're actually being shared with other people more broadly within the class community, and they get very excited about that. So that's another really great way of encouraging interactions. That's again more of an asynchronous sort of interaction, but it's still a really important type of interaction. But again, those demonstrations, those memes, those videos, to me, they fit both the synchronous and asynchronous, because I show them during class, I show them during lecture, but afterward, people are communicating with me. They're showing me other videos. They're sending me other memes. They're sharing those demonstrations with other people. And so it gets kind of the best of both, it's both in-class interaction and outside of class interaction. Things like Kahoot and breakout rooms, we've already talked about, and so I'm not going to go heavily into or anything. That's a great thing as well. The last thing that I guess I wanted to talk about is I tend to give my students as much as I can. It's hard in large classes, but I try to give them as much freedom as possible in their assignments, so that they can pick something that really resonates with them personally. And that's really, really important, because it gets them, again, thinking about that material outside of the classroom and how it relates. So one of the examples that I use, and this works well if you have like TA support, obviously, but as an example, at the beginning of the year, we talk about critical thinking in introductory psychology. What does critical thinking mean? What are some of the questions you should be asking yourselves? About the legitimacy of the source, or is there any other possible explanation? We go through a whole bunch of exercises in class, and we go through those exercises in class, and I give a couple of kind of humorous but interesting examples of advertisements that were clearly false, that actually got slapped with lawsuits for false advertising later on down the line. And we talk about why they were false, and how would we not fall into the trap? How do we separate fact from fiction? And then their first assignment is to go do the same thing. Go find some other advertisement, some other claim on Twitter or Facebook, something that you found that resonates with you, and show me a screenshot of that claim, and then answer each of those critical thinking questions about this. And the claim can be true or it can be false. It doesn't matter. You go through though and you answer, what is the source? Are there any other possible explanations? Going through absolutely everything. What is the research that's been done on this subject? Every little bit all the way down, answering all of these questions. And all of a sudden students then have freedom. It's not just saying, answer those questions about this thing that I have demanded you answer it about. They get to choose, and they get to pick. Some people will choose things about, keto diets, and other people will choose stuff about LSD, and other people will choose stuff about, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's the thing. Literally, people can pick anything. And that's a wonderful way of engaging students, again, especially in that sort of asynchronous manner, because they'll start researching something and they'll maybe send you some questions, or they again start thinking about the material outside of class. I focused really heavily on the asynchronous part in this portion, because I think I talked about the synchronous a lot in the last one. So I'm going to end it there, but yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Mark, so much. Thank you. Mohammed, please.
All right. Yes. Thank you very much. I think that Mark started this discussion on a very, very good note with regards to sort of engaging students, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, and I'd like to sort of talk a little bit more about that as well. I think active learning is really key in any style of lectures, if they are online or otherwise, both synchronous and asynchronous. I sort of do something similar to that as well, where I for example, code in my lectures, and then the students are following along. And let's say if it's an asynchronous lecture, I would tell them, okay, well, we built this. How about if we wanted the shape to move this way? What else? What do you do? So maybe go ahead and do that, and I'll show you in the next video, or I'll show it to you in our asynchronous classes, or you get to do it in your assignments, something like that, and then they can follow up with that. And then when we sort of get together in a synchronous class, then I ask them about those questions and say, well, who was able to solve this? The other part is just organization of content. And of course, we all know that organization is huge in teaching, basically having, knowing what you want to say. I think this is even a little bit more challenging in asynchronous, because it's really important that your videos are very much to the point in asynchronous. So let's say if you have, as Mark mentioned, about 10 minutes to 20 minutes. I think the longest video that kind of got away from me at the time was about 25 minutes. And having your videos labeled carefully what you're going to learn in this video. That's going to really help students and make sure that they're effective with their time. So you're going to learn, for example, about decision structures in programming in this video, and this is just going to be right to the point. And then what else they're going to learn in the next video, and then having sort of maybe quiz questions or activities associated with that video. In synchronous, you have a little bit more leeway. Of course, you still have to be very organized. It's worse when the worst thing that can happen is you lose your train of thought and you start rambling on and everybody is confused, and especially since synchronous classes take a bit long or longer, essentially, like let's say they're an hour, and then so people get tired, and if you're not organized, then things get away from you. So being organized is extremely important in both of them. And then emphasizing problem solving in general. Like again, with programming, I mean, the idea of being creative and looking at problems and how do you approach problems. I mean, the whole divide and conquer thing is really big in engineering, where you see a huge problem and then you decide to decompose that, and basically teaching people problem solving skills. Which really starts with how do you take a problem, decompose it, decide what part of it you're going to solve. For example, one thing that we do have is in programming is the idea of algorithm design. So there's this a name that we have that we say people are too keyboard happy. As soon as they see a problem, they jump on a keyboard and start coding, and we try to discourage that. We try to ask them to look at a problem, decompose it, devise your algorithms, and see sort of where you get with that type of problem solving. So teaching those skills and trying to guide them through that, and not just stick with a dry syntax stuff. And last but not least, I want to talk about contextualized learning. So essentially telling the students what is the purpose of learning this and where this is gonna be helpful. So for example, this generation, everybody's on their computers all the time, different apps on the phone, and different websites, app on a watch, in a car. You teach people how to program, it really helps to tell them, okay, well, when you log into Facebook, this is how you're authenticated, or if you're searching on Google, this is how information is categorized. I mean, of course, what you're learning is not as complicated, as complex as what they end up doing, but this is the very start of that concept. And that helps quite a bit. And I completely agree with Mark about jokes and having some humor. Although I don't know, a lot of our jokes are in software engineering are extra nerdy, so a lot of people may not relate or understand. But one joke that I share as sort of a bit of a dad joke is that there are 10 types of people in the world: the ones that know binary and the ones that don't. So I'll start with that.
Thanks, Mohammed. All right,
Thank you,
Lily, go ahead.
Mohammed. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Mark. They were like excellent ideas. Yes, anecdotes and stories are great to, add there. So I have like one activity that I love to do is to use the flipped classroom with the jigsaw activity, where the students have shareable documents, and they normally I do this when there's a lot of reading, so we kind of break out all the readings, and we have some students different groups reading one article where they are all taking notes together in a Google slide or like a SharePoint slide document that is shareable, and then they can actually give comments to each other, or I can drop comments to them. Then when they get to the class, when they get to the Zoom session, we just basically put them in those breakout rooms where they are discussing what the notes that they took. And so then they just kind of like flash all those ideas and then make sure that they become experts in the topic. And then they just go into the other groups where, you just have to send them back to another group. So you have to organize it very well to make it work. And then each one of them have to teach their own topics. And then once everybody teaches their own topics, so then the students can go to the different documents that they all have created, which becomes all their notes. They're kind of combined notes, and then they can drop questions about the different things that they didn't understand. So maybe the question was not asked during the discussion when they were all learning from each other. So that was kind of like, it's a complex, but it's great because you go through a lot of reading. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of pre-work. So then there's a lot of metacognition happening prior to the lesson. The other thing that I do sometimes, I bring a video or a story or something, and then since the students come from different cultures, so then we talk about how all the students from the different cultures, how they perceive that document or that video or that joke or that story. And so then that way we can learn also about how the different cultures work, and we talk about that, so just to make sure that we are respectful and we increase our intercultural competency. The other thing that I do is that sometimes they find, with the pop culture, they have to find a story of someone that made a mistake or something like that. And then we discuss that, and we basically talk about the different solutions on how we can solve those mistakes, and especially when it comes to communication. And we also bring guest speakers to do more informational interviews. So the students are the ones that they have to prepare the questions, and it will be professionals that are in the field where the students would like to go into. So those are the questions that I ask at the beginning of the course. And then so what we do is we will have a bank of questions that they can pick up from. But when we have shareable documents where they are basically go through a step process, which is all asynchronous, and then they bring the guest speaker, and then we ask questions, which is synchronous. And then at the end, once the guest speaker leaves, and normally it's like 30-minute interview. Once the speaker leaves, and we talk about what was the message, so they can think about the message. So it's kind of like the think, pair, share, and then they share the messages through the chat when I have big classes, or sometimes some people will share through the mic. Another thing that I like to do is the debates, and we do debates, we do simulations and role play. Sometimes they have to place a different person, and then that way we can understand how to communicate. We also analyze, the students have to analyze and research the right medium for the target audience with that message. What is the medium that we're going to use to be able to deliver that message. And also they have to sometimes find videos of what we have learned, and how those videos how the content that we are learning in the course applies to the real world. And so they have to give a little rationale why they introduce that video. And I say, okay, make sure that the video is not so long, or just tell the class, from this minute to this minute, just watch this if it's a very long video. The other things that we do is when sometimes we do group self-evaluations, and I have one that is kind of like the ideal team player and stuff like that. So what they do is they self-evaluate, and then we just share our strengths and weaknesses, and then we go into a discussion of giving each other ideas of how we can address those weaknesses, so then they can become a strength. But prior to that, we talk about how to give feedback without being offensive. So then they're all respectful towards each other. Also, when it comes to giving presentations or something, so if a student is doing an interview, at the end of that, basically I say to my students, okay, so we're going to provide feedback to the student or to that group of students. So then I give them a template of I like this of your presentation. The strongest aspect of your interview was this. This is the message that I took out. So then I say, just type it, don't press enter, and once the guest speaker leaves and stuff like that, we press enter. So then that student gets all this amazing feedback from absolutely everyone. Also, I create a shareable document where we all give feedback to each other, and the students start adding notes to everyone, because they may not work with everybody, but then we just kind of put the first name, and then everybody starts giving positive feedback to those classmates in that shareable document. Or you can also do it through the chat. What else? Yeah, I think that would be it. I have more ideas, but those are some good ideas there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lillian. And yeah, there are definitely many, many good ideas that all three of you shared. And what I like about the engagement strategies that you shared, both generally and then in a synchronous and asynchronous environment, is that they're all very, very student focused, with the student, the learner at the heart of everything that you do. And keeping that in mind, how do you make sure that those activities that you've planned are equitable, especially in these large classes that you teach? So for question 3, we'll have Mohammed speak first, please, then Lily and Mark.
Yes, thank you very much. This is an excellent question. Equitable participation is definitely a challenge in large classes. I think when I was a graduate student years and years ago, one of my first teaching experiences, there was a student that sat at the front of the class, and she nodded as I lectured. And as many of us, when we first started teaching, I was quite nervous. So the fact that she nodded really helped me out. The midterm came, and we graded the marks, and she ended up doing quite bad. And I was quite surprised, and we had I requested for a meeting. It wasn't so, like, obviously I wanted to help the student, but it was a bit of a disaster for me too at the time, because I thought that, well, what are you nodding at? I was thinking that I'm really relating to my students, as you nod, I'm like, okay, I'm really doing this. I'm a good teacher. And then, so obviously I'm not able to read my students. And that really sort of helped me to really think about, knowing my students and making sure that everybody's involved. And don't be deceived by the fact that a few people just give you all the answers. It's not really reflective of the whole class. So I think that this concept really goes beyond just online classes, but all classes in general. If anything, I'm going to go on a limb and say that equitable participation can perhaps be better achieved in online classes than in in-person classes, just because of the aid of technology, where we can have everybody sort of involved. So, for example, I still think even with the technology, it really helps to have TAs. So I leverage my TAs in a lot of these situations where, for instance, we divide everyone into breakout groups. And when they're working on a particular problem, and we make sure that they work in a group in a breakout room, and then myself and the TAs will go room to room and make sure that people are actually working on a particular problem. The other thing is that in engineering we have labs associated with every class, and let's say we have a class of 200 people, we end up dividing that class into groups of 25 to 30, and they're going to have a TA in charge of that group of students. And then so we have these very large classrooms, or in terms of online, many Zoom rooms or Discord rooms, where we kind of go to room and help people out. And the fact that about 5 or 6 groups of students have one TA, that really also helps them. A mid-semester survey is a tool that we have used to just make sure that people feel supported and throughout the semester. Techniques of just-in-time support. So, for example, when we get a particular question that is being asked a lot, create a short video on that very topic, or post some exercises and practice problems on that point. Really helps as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mohammed. I didn't want to nod my head in agreement after your anecdote, but I was agreeing with many of the strategies that you have listed here. Thank you, Lily.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. That was great. Okay, so there's just a few ideas. Some of the things that I do is I connect prior to the class, probably like 15 or 20 minutes if I can. And then I also stay longer after. And then I just start, like, I have like just casual conversations just to get to know the students, because sometimes those conversations help me create that connection to help them engage into the class more and maybe have the courage to participate more. And so what I do is I learned this technique, when I was doing like in business, like, you get a business card and you put a note behind the business card about that person, so it help you remember that person. So what I do is I just gonna keep notes of the students who I talk to and everything, and then once the class is over and everything, so I just add those to the students, and my goal is to try to connect with more students, so then when I see the student again, I can actually ask, oh, so how is your dog, or whatever. So then I found that those little tiny connections really helped. The other thing is like providing the students roles of being a leader and just taking turns. The students have said that working in breakout rooms actually builds their confidence level to actually share their information. Also, when the students come back and they share sometimes on the chat or on just through the mic, I always say thank you and I just give their name. That was a great question, great feedback. If they made a mistake or something, you know what, you're getting closer. So then I start providing that feedback. So then it kind of encourages everybody else to do the same thing. I also ask the students about, okay, what would you like to experience? So I get ideas from them. So sometimes I use a Mentimeter or something, or sometimes I use a Google form, and then I just kind of look at those ideas and try to incorporate those ideas into it, because once they are their ideas, they take more ownership and they want to make sure that they participate in that. Also, for the chats, I found that the students even though like not everybody likes online learning, but I found that my students are participating more because of the chat. And sometimes they don't have the courage to ask the question, with everybody seeing the question, but then they just send me a private question, and so I just make sure that I answer those questions. And I found that those quiet learners, they're actually asking more questions than before when we were in the class. And I just find that positive feedback, constantly positive feedback, immediate feedback allows me to just build those connections, build their confidence level, find their motivation to be able to just kind of like see how they're doing. And finally, one of the things that I like is that for them to be able to express their learning again different ways, through a video. I have had students share their learning through songs. Sometimes they take a hobby, like so say I give them a project and I say, okay, the topic doesn't matter, but this is the purpose, and they find something that they're very passionate about, and it's like you see presentations that you will never expect from those type of students, because they're so quiet and you barely hear them, but then you see them really blossom with those projects. So kind of like, what Mark and Mohammed were talking about, like project-based learning and just giving them choices. So there you go, Mark.
Well, thank you so much. Both Lily and Mohammed, you hit a lot of the points that I was hoping to talk about, and I've also learned a bunch of things from you. So thank you both so much. It's been fantastic. I agree. Mohammed was saying that sometimes equitable participation may be more effective in online, and I could not possibly agree more. I mean, it's actually really, really helpful. And all of the things we've been talking about today, we've been talking a lot about active learning strategies, right? And that's really easy to do in online scenarios, because you can ask people to do things, whether it's Kahoot or breakout rooms or things like that. It kind of forces people to get going in much the same way that you could do like a think, pair, share kind of activity in an in-person class. But both of you have also mentioned, and you're absolutely correct, that there are different types of participation. I think that's the one thing that I want to really point out with my time is there are different types of participation, different types of engagement. And we all know that some students really want to ask questions and try to dominate the conversation, and that happens sometimes in in-person classes. Some might ask you questions outside or send you emails or something like that. And even some still, or even send you like in the chat. And some are still too shy even to do that. You know, some people are just a little bit scared. And so I fully agree with what Lily was saying about trying to foster courage to participate. She mentioned, you know, saying great question after people, and I do that every single time, you know, no matter what the question is, you know, that was a great question, because it is a great question, because it helps your learning, right? And when you say that with sort of a smile and some enthusiasm and all of that, it kind of makes them feel good. It encourages them. It sort of positively reinforces them, and they actually will more and more people will see that, they observe that, and they start asking questions themselves. That's a really, really important thing. But like I said, there's different types of engagement. Actually, Lily mentioned previously, and this is something I was going to talk about in this section, was if you're having if you're either doing like a flipped classroom or a blended classroom, or if you have a guest speaker coming in, something like that, having students prepare questions in advance of the lecture, or having them do that, that's a really important way that students can participate in a way that isn't necessarily, you know, different students have different strengths. Some participate great before class. Some are great during class because they can think on their feet and they ask questions immediately about the content. And some need a little bit of time to digest what they've heard, and then they ask amazing questions after the fact. And so making sure that students have opportunities to be able to do that, you know, the sort of pre-participation, the during participation, and the after participation, I think you kind of hit a broader swath of people rather than just, you know, the questions during class or something like that. So I think that's really important as well. The other thing is, with some of the things that I've been talking about with demonstrations or activities or things like that, and you can do this in a flipped classroom, or you can do this in a regular lecture as well. When you have activities that students have to participate in, I mean, no one loves mandatory participation, but if you make it something that is enjoyable or exciting, or that they can see the purpose to it, that also really gets people engaged and it gets them participating in a way. So as an example, in one of my introductory psychology courses, it's for non-majors, and so it's meant to be sort of practical everyday life psychology. And so one of the things that we talk about, well, one chapter we talk a lot about stress and coping mechanisms, so how you can cope with stress in your everyday life, right? And so we actually do some of these activities, you know, whether it's deep breathing or whether it's thought chaining or things like that, we'll actually do those in class. And no matter how quiet you are, if you're writing down your own thoughts about your own experiences, that's still participating to me. You know, that's a way of engaging with the material. And so it doesn't necessarily mean putting up your hand. It doesn't necessarily mean asking a question or something like that, but just having the opportunity to really engage with that material and participate in an activity, even if it's just for your own sake. That's a really important thing. And so we talk about those stress and coping mechanisms, and especially right now, that's a really big deal for a lot of people. And so it's really, really important, and everyone recognizes the importance and they participate. Another thing we often do in that same class actually is we talk about, you know, because students are still growing up, they're still becoming the person who they're going to be. And we talk about, there's this idea in psychology of the possible selves that you could possibly be, you know, and it's more about goal setting and who do you want to be, and the different possibilities. And so it's a simple activity. It's actually meant for, you know, like middle school children, but you draw a tree, and there's a whole bunch of things. The leaves are the qualities that you want to be, or that you think would be great if you could be. You know, I wish I wasn't so shy. So you say, you know, more outgoing or something like that. You put these qualities. I want to be a good parent. I want to be a good person. You put those in the leaves. The roots are the things that support you, that help you toward that goal on your tree. And so you write those on this diagram of your tree over the roots. Bad influences, things like lightning and bugs and cracked, drought-looking ground. Those are the things that would prevent you from being the best possible version of yourself, you know, dropping out of school, doing drugs, you know, stuff like that, you know, whatever it happens to be. And then the positive influences, things that help you strengthen yourself. The details of the activity are unimportant, but the point is having something for students where they can actually think about it, engage with it, and actually have to do that activity in class. So providing that time during class where they can do it is actually really, really important. So rather than just, hey, go do this activity on your own sometime, you know, actually making sure that you have class time dedicated to being able to do these activities and engage in these different ways. So I think that's the biggest, those are the two biggest things, is making sure there's different ways of participating for people, pre, during, and post lecture, and also making sure that we can find ways to reach those people who are maybe too shy to otherwise ask questions or otherwise put their name in the chat, kind of thing. And yes, I totally agree with Lily. Actually, she mentioned that the chat function is fantastic because people can send you a private message, which is actually really great, because then they don't have to, then they're not nearly so scared to put it into the chat. So setting that up so that students can do that has been really, really helpful as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. And it definitely warms my heart as a blending and online learning specialist that you all find equitable engagement in an online environment to be actually more beneficial than face-to-face. So I really appreciate that. And I actually feel that I'm becoming my better self just by attending this session. So thank you all for sharing your expertise. I am cognizant of the time, but I did want to open it up quickly if anyone has any questions for any of the guest panelists, either to unmute your microphone or go ahead and use the chat. I'll just mute my microphone and give everyone an opportunity if they wanted to ask a question.
For me, it's saying the chat is disabled. I'm not sure if anybody else is getting
that. I didn't notice that, but Jennifer, did you want to just use your mic?
I actually just wanted to say thank you so much to the presenters. There were tons of great ideas here, and I've got a list of what I'm going to do for my teaching. So thank you so much.
I have a ton of great ideas as well from this. So, so thank you to Lily and Mohammed as well, and for Lorelei for setting it all up. It's been really, really educational and fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you. I learned so much, even though I had like a huge list of ideas, the ideas that you all have. And it's so great that we all come from different backgrounds, although I'm also a systems engineer. So I, kind of like have some of the similarities with Mohammed, but thank you again for all the ideas.
Same here. Thank you both.
Well, thank you very much to the three panelists, and thank you for the participants for attending. We'll end the session now. The recording will be available within 20. Well, actually, no, the recording will be available shortly. We do have another session tomorrow at the same time talking about considerations for assessments in large enrollment classes. Thank you, everybody, so much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.